episode of Let's Celebrate, a holiday origins podcast. I'm your host, Rusty Brown, and today we're celebrating the 4th of July, also known as the United States of America's Independence Day. For anybody who's new here, this is the podcast. For each episode, I research a specific holiday and discuss the history behind it, how the people before us celebrated it, how it evolved into what we celebrate today, and then I look at how we can incorporate traditional ways of celebrating back into the holiday to reconnect to why we're celebrating in the first place. Each episode includes a CeLibation, and that is a themed cocktail that goes with the holiday we're celebrating that you can make at home to celebrate along with me as you listen. I also include a mocktail option for those who don't want to imbibe with alcohol. So the CeLibation for this episode is a tropical summer sangria. For this CeLibation, you need a full bottle of wine, a half cup of rum, a cup of chopped pineapple, 2 limes, 1 orange, and about a half a cup of another fruit of your choice. To make this into a red, white, and blue CeLibation, you could put in strawberries, blueberries, and maybe a red apple sliced so you get that white and red together. To make this CeLibation, you're going to need some kind of carafe to put everything in. And you're going to slice your fruit and put it into your container. And then you're going to pour your wine over it and then add the rum. For me, I like to save my pineapple juice from the pineapple and pour that into the liquid as well, so you get a natural sweetness with it. Some people like to put a simple syrup or some other kind of sweetener in it, but I don't because I find that it's sweet enough. I like a dry wine. So then you're going to stick that in the fridge. Maybe give it a little shake before and leave it in there for at least an hour or maybe overnight. You don't want it to be in there for more than 3 days because then the fruit's going to go bad. But really, are you going to wait that long? So this could be something that you could make ahead of time if you think ahead. And to make this into a mocktail option, you just need to replace the wine and rum with a sparkling grape juice or a lemon lime soda, whatever is your preference. I had thought about incorporating some red, white, and blue fruits in mine since this is a 4th of July episode, but I already had a kitchen full of fresh tropical fruits. So instead of going out and buying a whole bunch of fruits that would only go into this beverage, I decided to use the fruits that I had around the house. Also, I prefer tropical fruits over berries most of the time anyways. So really, a sangria is just putting a bunch of fruits with wine and a other cordial or liquor. Oh, that's good. So last month's episode was about midsummer, and if you listened to that episode and decided to incorporate some new or old but new to you traditions into your celebrations, I'd love to hear about how you celebrated. You can email me at letscelebratepodcast@gmail.com with your celebratory stories. Also, don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Let's Celebrate Podcast. And I have also started a YouTube channel where I am putting up all of my episodes. So far, I have all of the video episodes up. So if you prefer to watch the episodes, you can now do that on YouTube. And that is youtube.com/@letscelebratepodcast. I celebrated midsummer by hosting an outdoor midsummer party at my home. I cooked a feast of grilled beef tenderloin, chicken, and hot dogs, along with the Swedish potato salad that I discussed in the midsummer episode, a cabbage slaw, a pot of beans, chocolate chip cookies, oatmeal raisin cookies, and a fruit salad with the fresh fruit that I had available, which was mango, watermelon, and pineapple. I also made a watermelon fresco rum cocktail for my beverage of the night. I had over 20 people come, and we sang karaoke and danced the night away. And I finished the night by building a tiny bonfire with a small group of friends. Surprisingly, a lot of people didn't want to stay for the bonfire. It was kind of warm, so I guess people didn't want to stand by a fire when it was still warm outside. I also decided to bring out my tent, and I slept outside, and so that when I woke up, I could be surrounded by the fresh morning dew. I did not, however, wash my face or roll around in the dew naked. And because, well, our backyard hosts our cows sometimes, and I really didn't want to roll into a cow patty. Also, I didn't want to get too many weird looks from my neighbors. I'm still getting to know them. I had wanted to do a flower crown making activity with my girlfriends before the party, but that ended up not happening because I couldn't find a good source to get enough flowers and vines for everyone. Maybe by next year I will have a plan to find flowers. But despite not having flower crowns, everyone seemed to enjoy the party. So now on to America's midsummer celebration, also known as the 4th of July or Independence Day. So we're going to start with the history behind the 4th of July. The Independence Day tradition and celebrations began in the 18th century in the middle of the American Revolution. At this time, the U.S. consisted of 13 colonies that was, as some people say, a melting pot, full of English, Irish, Scottish, and European people and beyond. Also, at the time, each group lived in their own little bubbles, speaking their own native tongue and practicing their own customs and faiths. Despite these differences, they had one thing in common, and it was that they were considered British subjects and had to swear loyalty to the King of England and submit to his laws. Things changed in 1765 when the British Parliament imposed the Stamp Act that put a tax directly onto the colonists for the very first time. The colonists did not like this at all, and all 13 colonies opposed the taxation because they didn't have representation in the British Parliament, but were still forced to pay these taxes to the king. So taxation without representation became the battle cry of the Revolution. The Stamp Act was repealed the very next year, but Parliament replaced that act with an even more restrictive act called the Declaratory Act, and that gave Great Britain complete power to legislate the colonies. So you can imagine they did not like that. And this inspired many colonists to rise up and demand freedom from the British Parliament. The next few years were sprinkled with violent rebellions as people started viewing the British Parliament as corrupt. When the Revolutionary War began in April 1775, the colonists who desired complete independence from Great Britain were considered radicals. But by the next year, many more colonists had come to favor independence. And then in early 1776, Thomas Paine's pamphlet entitled Common Sense helped change all of that. When it came out, it ignited a spark inspiring the colonists to demand independence from England and to create a democratic republic. Previously unthinkable ideas for the colonists. I have linked a digital copy of Common Sense in the references for you to read if that's something you're interested in. On June 7, 1776, the Continental Congress met at the Pennsylvania State House, now called Independence Hall in Philadelphia. Here, Richard Henry Lee, the delegate from Virginia, called for a motion for the independence of the colonies. There was a heated debate, and Congress postponed the vote and instead appointed a 5-man committee to draft a statement to formally justify the break with Great Britain. The 5-man committee included some people you've probably heard of: Thomas Jefferson from Virginia, John Adams of Massachusetts, Roger Sherman of Connecticut, Benjamin Franklin of Pennsylvania, and Robert R. Livingston from New York. On July 2nd, the Continental Congress met again, and that's when they voted in favor for Lee's motion for independence. On this day, John Adams wrote to his wife Abigail, saying that he believed that July 2nd would go down in history and would be celebrated as the great anniversary festival by their succeeding generations. He added that the celebration should have, quote, pomp and parade, games, sports, guns, bells, bonfires, and illuminations from one end of the continent to the other. John Adams was a little salty about July 4th becoming the official date to celebrate the birth of America's independence, and it said that he turned down celebrations held on July 4th in protest. 2 days after the Continental Congress voted in favor of independence on July 4th, the final draft of the Declaration of Independence was approved and formally adopted, and thus this is why the 4th became the date celebrated as the United States Independence Day. The Declaration of Independence was largely drafted by Thomas Jefferson with input from the other 5 appointed delegates. It declared that the 13 colonies were now free, united, and independent states, no longer under the rule of the British monarch. On July 9th, John Hancock sent a copy of the Declaration of Independence to George Washington, who was at the time fighting in the Revolutionary War. After sharing the news with his troops, they rushed to the Bowling Green and tore down the statue of King George III. Despite declaring their independence from Britain, in the end, it took 8 years of fighting with Britain for the colonies to win and gain full independence, with the war ending in 1783. Interestingly, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson both died on July 4th, 1826, which was the 50th anniversary of the adoption of the Declaration of Independence. James Monroe, another founding father and the 5th president, also died on July 4th, but in 1831. The last letter Jefferson wrote was to Roger C. Waitman, declining an invitation to celebrate the 50th anniversary in Washington, D.C. In the letter, Jefferson writes that he believes the Declaration of Independence will be a call to men to, quote, burst the chains, to accept the blessings and security of government. He also wrote that the Declaration, quote, restores the free right to the unbounded exercise of reason and freedom of opinion. And he wrote of his hopes that the day will forever be a reminder of these rights. It was actually the death of Thomas Jefferson and John Adams that helped promote July 4th as a day to be commemorated and celebrated. The U.S.'s motto, E pluribus unum, I believe that's how you say it. I don't know how to speak Latin. That is Latin for out of many, one, was suggested by the Founding Fathers Committee on July 4th, 1776 as well. So now let's take a look at how this time of year was celebrated in the past. John Adams may not have gotten others behind his idea of celebrating July 2nd as the official day of America's birthday, but they did go with his suggestions to celebrate with pomp and parade, games, sports, guns, bells, bonfires, and illuminations from one end of the continent to the other. This is pretty much how people have continued to celebrate July 4th since the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Some of the initial celebrations were also modeled after the King's pre-revolutionary birthday celebrations, which included bonfires, bell ringing, processions, and speeches. Some people also celebrated with mock funerals for King George III to symbolize the end of the monarch's reign and tyranny over America and the newfound freedom and rebirth of liberty. Toasting or criticizing the king or other patriotic heroes in taverns and banquets became an informal political speech that would often be printed in newspapers at the time. In 1801, Thomas Jefferson was the first president to celebrate the 4th of July at the White House. They celebrated that year with parades, horse races, and foods and drinks. On the first anniversary in 1777, Congress was still occupied with the war, so the first commemoration of independence took place in Philadelphia, with concerts, parades, speeches, prayers, toasts, bonfires, the firing of cannons and muskets, and the public readings of the Declaration of Independence. The first celebration in Philadelphia also began the tradition of setting off fireworks. Ships, also decked out in red, white, and blue bunting, also fired off a 13-gun salute for each of the 13 colonies. As the U.S. continued to expand and gain new territories, the 13-gun salute has now become the salute to the Union. That is, one gun for each state is fired at noon on Independence Day on most military bases. The fireworks for a very long time have usually been accompanied by patriotic songs like the Star-Spangled Banner, God Bless America, America the Beautiful, My Country 'Tis of Thee, This Land is Your Land, Yankee Doodle, and more. Drinking has also always been a part of the 4th of July celebrations, with William Williams, one of the founding fathers from Connecticut, wrote on July 5th, 1777, about his disapproval of the celebration, saying that there was a, quote, great expenditure of liquor that day. Also, in 1778, even George Washington issued double rations of rum to his soldiers for the anniversary of Independence Day. In 1781, Massachusetts made July 4th an official state holiday and became the first state to do so. By the end of the 18th century, there were two major political parties in the U.S., the Federalist Party and the Democratic Republicans, and each held separate 4th of July celebrations in large cities. But it didn't become a common holiday for most Americans until after the War of 1812. Another war between the U.S. and Great Britain over trade, the Native American policy, and the Western expansion. 4th of July had become the most important secular holiday in the United States by the 1870s, and on June 28, 1870, Congress finally made Independence Day an unpaid federal holiday. Even communities in the Western frontier were celebrating Independence Day by this time. And then on July 4th, 1884, the people of France presented the Statue of Liberty to the United States as a way to celebrate our independence. In some New England towns in the 19th and 20th century, the night or eve before the 4th was when they would hold the big gatherings with bonfires at the center. It became common to build giant pyramids out of barrels and casks and light them on fire. The tallest of them was in Salem, Massachusetts, with 40 tiers of barrels, and some New England towns still practice this tradition. Eventually, the celebrations in some areas became venues for political parties, leaders, and constituents to discuss the issues the country was facing and relate it to independence. Women's rights advocates, abolitionists, immigration opponents, and the temperance movement have all at one time declared they could not celebrate Independence Day if all Americans were not equal. In 1859, African Americans were urged by the Banneker Institute of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to celebrate Independence Day while also contemplating the paradoxes between the ideas expressed in the Declaration of Independence, like the phrase from the second paragraph that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And how that idea does not parallel with the idea of slavery, which was still practiced at that time. Eventually, Independence Day's importance as a political venue dwindled at the end of the 20th century, it did continue to be marked with fireworks, patriotic concerts, and parades. It wasn't until 1938 that Congress finally made July 4th a paid federal holiday. So, how do people celebrate Independence Day today? From 1776 to the present day, July 4th has pretty much been celebrated the same way. Generally, a parade starts the day, followed by a get-together with friends or family for a picnic or barbecue, and after the sun goes down, a fireworks show either at someone's personal home or at a public park, sports stadium, fairgrounds, public shorelines, or town squares. July 4th continues to be a symbol of America's national power and freedom of the people. Since it falls in the middle of summer when kids have their summer break, the 4th of July has also become a time for family and friends to have get-togethers that include outdoor barbecues bedecked with red, white, and blue decor and American flags, and of course fireworks. Many people also take advantage of what is normally a long weekend to go out of town. The first week of July is one of the busiest travel periods of the year in the U.S. People choose to go to the ocean, mountains, or to the lake to celebrate America's beauty, and some also go to a historic city for an educational trip. Barbecues have long been associated with Independence Day. It's an efficient way to feed a large group of people outdoors, and since meat is more expensive than other foods, it is also seen as a symbol of prosperity. Hot dogs and hamburgers have become an Independence Day barbecue staple, with Americans eating 155 million hot dogs on July 4th. Other food items are baked beans, coleslaw, corn on the cob, other picnic sides, fruit, and a plethora of desserts, usually using red, white, and blue ingredients. In most cities, there are still public events that include parades, carnivals, concerts, baseball games, picnics or barbecues, political speeches, and many cities and towns continue to host a public 4th of July fireworks show. More than $300 million in fireworks are imported into the U.S. every year. Many states sell fireworks for personal home use, but some states have banned or limited fireworks for personal use due to safety or dry weather. An interesting fact, 60% of all fireworks-related injuries for each year occur during the month surrounding July 4th. New York has hosted the largest fireworks display in the U.S. since 1976, and it is sponsored by Macy's and televised every year. Some other ways to celebrate the 4th is by playing games like cornhole, horseshoe, croquet, or backgammon, and many people choose to wear red, white, and blue, the colors of the American flag, to celebrate. Some people enjoy creating patriotic crafts, either as a form of entertainment for the kids at a barbecue or to create decor for the home. And of course, there are some people who celebrate America's capitalism by shopping 4th of July sales. So now let's look at how we can incorporate traditional ways of celebrating back into Independence Day. Since July 4th is a day to remember and commemorate that the United States declared itself a free, united, and independent nation, and it also celebrates the significance of the Declaration of Independence that Abraham Lincoln called, quote, a rebuke and a stumbling block to tyranny and oppression. This year, maybe in addition to watching a parade, having a barbecue, and admiring a fireworks show or having a bonfire, maybe you can add a new tradition of reading the Declaration of Independence. If you are American, it can be a helpful reminder of the foundation this country was built on and the hopes the Founding Fathers had for us as a nation. And maybe you can contemplate on what it means that all men are created equally. As I said before, I have added a link to a digital copy of the Declaration in the references in the show notes. I have also added a link to Thomas Paine's Common Sense. I suggest that you also read that document to get an idea of what kind of ideas inspired Americans to unite for freedom and fight for it, and what actually led us to our independence. This year I'm going to be here in Guatemala, so I doubt that there will be any kind of public Independence Day celebrations here, but I do plan on reading the Declaration, at least skimming through it. I have a physical copy of it somewhere that sometimes I just like to look at, read through, because it's good to know what our rights are. And that really is the fundamental book on rights for American citizens. Also, I plan on reading Thomas Paine's Common Sense. I think I had to read that for a class when I was in school, but it's probably been 10 to 15 years since the last time I read it. So I think it would be good to brush up on that literature and remind myself of what it means to actually be a free, united, and independent nation. And as an American, what the freedoms are that I have. So that wraps it up for this episode, and I will be back in August to discuss a surprise episode, because I don't actually know what holidays there are in August, so I'm going to have to look into that. But I'm sure it'll be interesting, because it won't be an American holiday, because there are no American holidays that I can think of in August. So I will be doing a holiday for another country. If you have enjoyed this episode and want to hear more, please like and subscribe, maybe even leave a review. How do you celebrate 4th of July? I would love to hear your celebratory stories. While I was doing the research for this episode, I came across some people's childhood recollections of Independence Day celebrations, and I would really like to start collecting celebratory stories like that. So if you have a fond memory of celebrating the 4th, or maybe you can ask your grandparent how they celebrated when they were younger, they would probably love to tell you about a fond memory like that. You can send me a voice message or an email at letscelebratepodcast@gmail.com. And also don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Let's Celebrate Podcast. And like I said at the beginning, I have started a YouTube channel if you prefer to watch the episodes on there. It's youtube.com/@letscelebratepodcast. And as always, all my references are in the show notes if you're interested in reading more about Independence Day traditions. Also, you can find the links to the Declaration of Independence and Thomas Paine's Common Sense down there. Thanks for listening and joining me again on this adventure. Have fun celebrating, and I hope you've learned something new today. Bye!